Hi, and welcome to the Warehouse Church Wednesday Bible study. How is everyone doing tonight? I'm going to introduce myself. My name is Chris Edelen. I've been coming to the Warehouse for about 4 years, and I'm glad to be here tonight to share a little bit about time. So a little bit more about myself is I am a high school teacher here at Cincinnati Public High School. And I've been doing that for 6 years. Before that, I was a zookeeper at Cincinnati Zoo for another 20 plus years. So science is a big part of my background, and we'll be talking a little bit about some sciencey stuff today. So hope you enjoy the show. We've been talking about time. Tonight's topic is time flies. Last week, Pastor Sherman was talking about making the most of your time here. And so we're going to talk a little bit about time, and I'm going to start off with a joke. All right, so this man is having a conversation with God, and he asks God, he goes, God, how long is 1,000,000 years to you? And God goes, 1,000,000 years is like a second. And the man goes, God, how much is $1,000,000 to you? And God says, $1,000,000 is like a penny. And the man goes, God, can I have a penny? And God goes, in a second. Hope you like that one. That was my dad joke for the day. If we look at time, time is relative. Albert Einstein said that and showed that. And if we look just within our own solar system, time operates very differently. If you look at the planet Jupiter, the biggest planet in our solar system, it also spins around the fastest. And so it takes only about 10 hours for it to rotate completely around on its axis once. So if you were living on Jupiter, your entire day is only 10 hours. So it makes for a really easy work schedule if you got that, because you're over and done in three hours. But in addition to spinning very quickly on its axis, it does take its time to go very slowly around the sun. And it takes about 29 years for Jupiter to make a complete orbit around the sun. So on Jupiter, your day is 10 hours, but your year is actually 29 years. If you move a little bit closer in toward our planet, Mars is very much a lot like us. It has a 25-hour day, but unfortunately, its year is actually about 2 of our years here on Earth. But that's not the strangest. The strangest is actually the planet Venus. Venus is the second closest planet to the sun, and it takes 224 days for Venus to go completely around the sun. But Venus also rotates the slowest out of any of the planets in our solar system, and it basically makes a complete rotation on its axis in 243 of our days. So if you were born on Venus, you would celebrate your first birthday before you celebrated your first full day on the planet, because it actually takes longer for it to rotate on its axis than it does to go all the way around the sun. So time is very different depending on where you're at. We like the concept of time. There are a lot of people that sing lots of songs about time. Cher said that she wishes she could turn back time. Mick Jagger and the Rolling Stones said time is on her side. Cyndi Lauper believes that there is time after time. And my personal favorite, and this is going back to maybe how old I am, but Jim Croce wants to put time in a bottle. So time is something that has always fascinated us as human beings. I was always fascinated by the superheroes that could stop time. And I think we've all probably at some point dreamed in our life that we wished we could go back into time to maybe change something about our lives. So time is a very interesting concept for us as humans and how we measure time. So we're going to be looking at 2 verses today. We are going to be looking at 2 verses in the book of Psalms. The first one is Psalms 90, verse 12, and that says, "Teach us to number our days that we may gain a heart of wisdom." And our second verse is Psalms 39, which says, "Show me, Lord, my life's end and the number of my days. Let me know how fleeting my life is." All right, now, I like to make sure that when you're looking at a little bit of Scripture that you understand about the history of the actual book. And if we're looking in the book of Psalms, the Psalms has 150 chapters, and they were authored by a bunch of different people. A lot of the Psalms were written by David, but his son Solomon also wrote some Psalms. The Psalm we're going to talk about today was written by Moses, but there are several other authors that have contributed to the book of Psalms. And if we look at the name Psalms, Psalms is actually a Greek name for the musical instrument as well as the music that accompanies it. And so the book of Psalms is often seen as a book of worship songs as well as a book of different prayers. If you look at the Greek, again, it says the Psalms or Psalters, but Hebrew, it is Telehim, which basically means praises. So those are a little bit about the history of Psalms. And one of the things I think that is really neat about the book of Psalms is when you're reading some of the Psalms, there's just a lot of raw human emotion in Psalms. A lot of the Psalms are the author asking God, why am I going through this? Lord, why am I going through this experience? And I think we've all kind of been at that point in our lives at one time when we're just going, God, why me? Why is this happening to me? And so I think it's kind of refreshing when you look at the book of Psalms because it's talking about where the writer is and their emotional state. So, and this is really important when we look at Psalms 20. Psalms 20 was written by Moses. It is the only one written by him in the book of Psalms. And if we're looking at Moses' life, and if we look at the entirety of the chapter 20 in Psalms, understanding that Moses this is written at probably the later stages of his life, which makes sense when he's talking about teach me to count the number of my days. But as Moses was nearing the end of his life, we need to look back and understand that here is a man whose calling it was to deliver the nation of Israel out of bondage to Egypt and into the promised land. Now, unfortunately for Moses, the Israelites could not follow what God was asking for. And as a punishment to all the people that originally came out of Egypt with Moses, God said that no one from that surviving group was going to enter into the Holy Land. So Moses spends his last remaining days bringing the nation of Israel all the way to the doorstep, but he never gets to cross the threshold himself. Also at this time of the writing of this psalm, Moses is also going through the experience of the death of his sister Miriam. Miriam was the one that placed the baby Moses in the basket and set him adrift into the river Nile. And also, he's experiencing the death of his brother Aaron. Aaron was a very big part of his life because Aaron was kind of like the speaker for Moses. Moses said that he had a fear of public speaking. A lot of people can relate to that. And so Aaron was kind of appointed by God to be the mouthpiece for Moses, as well as the first high priest for the nation of Israel. So at this time of the writing of Psalm 20, Moses is going through a grieving process of his two siblings, as well as understanding that his days are also dwindling closer and closer to his end, and he will never be able to enter into the Holy Land that he was called to lead his people to. So when we look back in the book's Psalm 20, we're going to go forward a little bit, and in verse 3, it says, You turn people back to dust. You return to dust, you mortals. Lord, you have been our dwelling place throughout all generations. Before the mountains were born, you were brought forth the whole world. From everlasting to everlasting, you are God. So what's interesting about this is that if you look at a lot of Psalms do a lot of contrasting of things. And so Moses is actually contrasting the everlasting, immortal God with the fact that human beings are very fleeting and temporal in God's sight. And so because of that, he is going to encourage us as believers into looking at the end of our days, to be able to count the end of our days so that we can in turn gain wisdom. And again, when you're looking at this writing right here, remember that Moses is nearing the end of his own life. So this is just right up in front of him, something that he has to come to grips with. So if you look in Psalms 90, verses 9 through 11, it also says, all of our days pass away under your wrath. We finish our years with a moan. Our days may come to 70 years or 80 if our strength endures. Yet the best of them are all but trouble and sorrow, for they quickly pass and we fly away. Again, as I'm thinking about this, I'm thinking about Moses writing this at the end of his own life. Seeing kind of like the writing on the wall and trying to pass on a little bit of wisdom to us as the next generation, so to speak. And so we need to understand that we do have a finite amount of days on this planet. Eventually our lives will come to an end. And so we need to understand what we want to do with them. Now, Moses is telling us that we need to understand our life as from beginning to end so that we might gain wisdom. And what wisdom is he talking about? Well, Moses is more likely talking about the wisdom of who and what God is. This is why in the previous verses in chapter 90, he's talking so much about God and God's nature, both in terms of God being everlasting, without beginning, without end, as well as how God is experiencing and relating to human beings. Moses, in verse 20, is talking about how we need to experience God. God has reached out to us, and now we need to understand what it takes to hold our hand out and walk with God. And so my question to kind of you guys, and you guys can put this in the chat if you're on Facebook, is are you a procrastinator, or are you one of those people who is, why wait, I already know it needs to be done, and you jump on it right away? Now, for me personally, I could be an Olympic level procrastinator. I put everything off to the very end. And I think for me, I do so because I realize that if I have a deadline that I need to fill, that there's a certain point that I can't cross. So at some point, that deadline is what spurs me finally to action. If you sit there and come up to me and say, hey, Chris, can you get this to me in a couple of weeks? That means nothing to me, because a couple of weeks means like 40. And so for me, I will constantly push something off unless I have that very set deadline. So when I think about knowing the number of my days, I realize that at some point I have a set deadline that I need to meet, and I need to get cracking on things. Now, my wife is the complete opposite. If she finds out she's got something she's got to do, she is on it, and she starts it right away. And don't tell her I told you any of this. But if you ask her about me being a procrastinator, you will never hear an end of the stories. So, but I get things done. So I still get things done. but it's a fact that I know that I have a deadline. I know there's a point that I can't go past that actually spurs me into action. So when we know the limit of our days, it tends to hopefully focus us to reflect back on our lives, both now and for what we want to do with eternity. So when Moses is saying, let me know the number of my days so that I can gain wisdom, he is, in a sense, telling us that once you know that the end is coming, what are you going to do to that point? Where are you going to be spending your time, your resources, and what is the end conclusion you're going to come up with? So Moses' hope is that we gain wisdom. And if we look at Proverbs, first Proverbs, verse 7, it says, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. So I think that when you're looking at chapter 90 that Moses is writing, he's talking a lot about God's anger and God's wrath and how man's behavior and man's rebellion has created this rift between the two of us. And so in verse 20, again, he's calling us for us to understand that time is moving forward. We have a set number of days on this planet. And so if we want to repair that rift, if we want to bridge the gulf of our own iniquities and the separation that they cause us with God, then we have to come to a certain wisdom. Fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. And when we talk about fear of the Lord, when the Proverbs talks about fear of the Lord, it's talking about holding God with awe and with respect and with an understanding about who God is. It also helps for us to understand who we are. If we understand who God is and we understand who we are, we start to get a little bit of insight and knowledge and wisdom into the roles that each one of us has to have. Moses wants us to desperately understand our temporal nature so that we can focus growing closer to God. So if we look at Psalms 90, verse 20, Moses is telling us that we need to understand our time and place on this planet, and we need to move toward understanding and growing closer to God. If we look at Psalms 39, it says, show me, Lord, my life's end and the number of my days. Let me know how fleeting my life is. Because when we talk about time, we move forward into time. I'm going to kind of quote Kung Fu Panda. I hope you guys are okay with that. But in Kung Fu Panda, the Sifu is explaining to his protege that we cannot go back in time, so we can't change it. And that we cannot go forward in time because we haven't experienced it. All we have now is today, and that is why it's called the present, because it's a gift. So I always kind of like that. And it helps remind me to kind of make the most of the days that I have, as the psalm writers are encouraging us to do. And to look at ourselves, look at who we want to be, look at how we want to relate to God and the steps that we need to know to come to that understanding of who God is and our relationship for us. So our lives will always move forward in time. And in the end, it's our experiences, what we've learned in the past, that can give us wisdom and knowledge on how God actually impacts our lives. I teach high schoolers, and I tell people that there's not a lot of difference between a high schooler and a regular adult. They both have a lot of the same knowledge, and I will say this, is that given all the fact that we're trying to cram into kids' heads, I think they have a lot more knowledge than we give them credit for. But what they don't have is they don't have those experiences. And it's our experiences that help us to gain understanding and wisdom on how to act, how to react, and how to interact, not with just other people, but with ourselves and with God as well. And so knowing that we have a number of days and being able to draw on our experiences and knowledge in the past, we can come to that wisdom. We can come to that understanding of who God is, who we are, and what God expects from us. So that's where that knowledge and fear of the Lord comes from. It comes from holding God in respect and awe and trying to understand him through the lens of our own experiences. And so when we look at time, time constantly moving forward, time aging us, so to speak, maturing us, ripening us, we can come to a greater understanding and a fuller appreciation of how God has impacted our lives. So when we look at the book of Psalms, Psalms 90, we see an author in Moses who is coming to the end of his days, reflecting on all the things that has happened to him, reflecting on his triumphs and his mistakes, reflecting on the time that he has spent with God, the conversations he has had with God, those moments that he has had with God. He can look back on his life and understand where he's been as well as where he's going. So when we look at how time flies, time does go by in the blink of an eye. I tend to measure time these days on the kids, my friends' kids. I can't, so many times I sit there and I look at their kids and I go, holy cow, when did they grow up? My son is in cross country, and some of the other runners in cross country with them, I have known since they were in first grade, and seeing how they have grown and the people that they have become, I look back and go, where did all that time go? I often also wonder, why does it take so long for one day to pass? There's no longer day for a teacher than the last few days of school. They seem to drag on forever. Because the kids want to leave and the teachers want to leave, and time seems to drag by so slowly. So again, if we look at Psalms 90, verse 20, verse 12, it says, teach us to number our days, that we may gain a heart of wisdom. Where are you in that process? Are you like my wife, who likes to jump on a project right away and get it done and over with and prepared for so that she can move on to other things? Or are you like me and a procrastinator who is waiting until the very last moment to try to get things done? No matter who you are or where you fall in those lines, there is that end. And we can't take anything with us, but there is a lot that we can leave behind. So use your time well. Understand that our time and our days are just moving forward. We can't go back and change the past, but we can use our experiences and the wisdom we gain in understanding God to prepare ourselves for that eternity we will spend with him. So my name is Chris. I'd like to thank you guys for joining me today. I hope you learned a little bit of something. And I hope that we can see you here on Sunday at 10 o'clock.